Story disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction and is intended for entertainment purposes only. The content includes dark themes, horror elements, and fictional depictions of rituals and sacrifices that are purely imaginative and not reflective of any real-life practices or beliefs. Viewer discretion is advised. This video is not suitable for younger audiences, and parental guidance is recommended. The story does not endorse or promote any harmful behavior, violence, or dangerous activities. Please note that all characters, events, and settings are entirely fictional and created for the purpose of storytelling. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events, is purely coincidental. The battle intensifies as Biko and Amani confront the cult's sinister plans and the true power of the pendulum. In these chapters, the stakes rise as they find an unexpected ally, face terrifying visions, and venture into the jungle to uncover an ancient seal that could save their city, or doom it. Their mission is fraught with traps, relentless pursuers, and the ever-present pull of the void, an entity older and more dangerous than they imagined. As the pendulum's influence grows, Biko and Amani must fight not just cult members but their own fears and a force that threatens to tear reality apart. Will they unlock the key to stopping the darkness, or will the city fall into shadow? Stay tuned to find out. Biko and Amani knew they couldn't face the cult alone, they needed allies. They sought out Ao, an old friend of Biko's who had once been a tech prodigy before retreating from the public eye. Ao was known for his knack for hacking into the city's surveillance systems, a skill that could prove invaluable against the cult. They found him in a small, cluttered workshop on the outskirts of Tanga, surrounded by monitors and gadgets that blinked with cryptic codes. Ao was skeptical at first, but as Biko and Amani explained the situation, showing him the notebook and recounting their encounters, Ao's curiosity turned into concern. "The pendulum, it's like nothing I've seen before," Ao muttered, his eyes darting across the screens as he pulled up satellite images of the city. "If what you're saying is true, this thing could do more than just mess with minds. It could disrupt everything: technology, communications, even time itself." Biko leaned in, pointing at a glowing spot on the map. "That's where they're gathering. The pendulum's at the center of it all. We need to find a way to stop it." Ao nodded, tapping a few keys and bringing up a series of encrypted files. "There's something else. I've been tracking strange energy readings across the city, and they all lead back to one place, the old clock tower. It's been abandoned for years, but recently, there's been a lot of activity there. It's like the whole place is buzzing with energy." Amani's eyes widened. "The clock tower. That's where the pendulum must be anchored. If we can disrupt whatever they're doing there, maybe we can cut off its power." Ao smirked, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Let's find out. I'll hack into their systems, see if I can pull any data that'll give us an edge. But you two need to be ready, whatever's happening at that tower, it's big. And it's only getting bigger." Just as Ao's words hung in the air, the lights in the workshop flickered, then went out, plunging them into darkness. Ao cursed under his breath, scrambling for a flashlight. "They must have found us," he hissed, eyes scanning the dim room. "They are cutting off our power." Biko's pulse quickened. Shadows crept along the walls, growing and intertwining like the claws of a giant beast. A low hum filled the air, a vibration that made the hairs on Biko's arms stand up. The pendulum's influence was spreading, reaching even into the safety of Ao's hideout. Before they could react, the monitors blinked back on, but the screens were filled with distorted images, fractured reflections of Tanga, twisted and broken. Biko saw flashes of himself and Amani running through endless corridors, trapped in a maze with no exit. Ao's voice was distant, muffled, like he was speaking from the bottom of a well. "Get out!" Ao shouted, his voice cutting through the haze. "They are trying to get inside our heads. Go. Now." Biko and Amani stumbled out of the workshop, the hum following them like an invisible spectre. As they ran, Biko could hear faint whispers in the wind, voices that echoed his deepest fears and doubts. It was the pendulum reaching out, trying to break them from within. They had to stay strong, they couldn't let it win. Biko and Amani decided to take refuge in an old church on the outskirts of the city, a place that had long been abandoned but still carried an air of solemnity and peace. They hoped that the thick stone walls and ancient symbols would provide some protection from the pendulum's reach. The inside was quiet, filled with the scent of old wood and damp stone. They sat on the dusty pews, catching their breath. Amani pulled out the notebook, tracing the faded symbols with her finger. "There's something we are missing," she said softly. "Some connection we haven't made yet." Biko nodded, his mind racing. He thought about the visions, the cult, the pendulum, and the constant pull of the shadows. It all felt like a puzzle with pieces that refused to fit together. As he stared at the altar, an idea struck him. "The pendulum reflects desires," Biko murmured. "But what if it's not just reflecting? What if it's amplifying them, twisting them into something darker?" Amani looked up, her eyes widening in realization. "And the cult thinks they can control it, but they're just feeding it. The more they want, the stronger it gets." Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a loud crash as the church doors flew open. A cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles they had lit. In the doorway stood Mr. Chuma, flanked by two of his followers, their eyes glazed and lifeless. "Running won't save you," Mr. Chuma sneered, stepping into the church. "The pendulum's pull is inescapable. You can't hide from what you truly desire, Biko. It will find you." Biko stepped forward, clenching his fists. "We are not afraid of you. Your pendulum, your cult, it's all built on lies." Mr. Chuma laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed through the church. "Lies? Truth? They are just words, Biko. The pendulum doesn't care about such things. It only knows hunger. And right now, it's starving." As Mr. Chuma raised his hand, the pendulum's glow appeared in his palm, swirling and pulsating with dark energy. The church seemed to bend and warp around it, the walls shifting as if they were made of liquid. Biko and Amani braced themselves, feeling the ground tremble beneath their feet. Biko took a deep breath, stepping closer to the pendulum's light. "We'll stop you, no matter what it takes." Mr. Chuma's smile faded, replaced by a cold, unfeeling stare. "You don't understand, do you? The pendulum isn't something you can fight. It's a force of nature, a mirror of the human soul. And once you've seen what it shows you, there's no going back." The room seemed to collapse in on itself, darkness engulfing them as Biko and Amani struggled to hold on. But just as it felt like they would be lost to the void, Amani's voice cut through the noise, a single, clear word that echoed with the strength of 1,000 voices. "No." The pendulum's light flickered, the shadows recoiling as if burned. Biko reached out, grabbing Amani's hand, and together they pushed back against the darkness, forcing it away. The church reassembled around them, the walls solidifying, the air clearing. Mr. Chuma and his followers were gone, vanished like smoke in the wind. Biko and Amani stood in the center of the church, their breaths rugged but victorious. They had faced the pendulum's power and survived, but they knew the battle was far from over. The pendulum was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next opportunity. They would need to be stronger, smarter, and more united than ever. But for now, they had won a small victory, and that was enough to keep them going. The quietness of the church felt almost serene, but Biko and Amani knew it was only a brief respite. As they stepped back into the night, the city of Tanga seemed different, darker, colder, as if the pendulum's influence had started to seep into every corner. The streets were eerily quiet, the usual bustle replaced by a haunting stillness. We need to find out where Mr. Chuma took the pendulum, Amani said, her voice determined. We have to stop him before it's too late. Biko nodded, gripping the notebook tightly. They had one lead left, the old clock tower Ayo had mentioned. It loomed in the distance, a silent guardian over the city, its once grand facade now marred by years of neglect. But now it held the key to everything. As they approached, the air grew heavy, and the hairs on Biko's neck stood up. There was something about the clock tower that felt off, like it was caught between worlds. A low hum echoed from inside, growing louder with each step they took. The pendulum was close. Pushing open the rusted door, Biko and Amani entered the tower. Inside, the walls were covered in strange symbols, etched in a language neither of them recognized. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and something else, something metallic, like iron. They climbed the narrow, winding staircase, the hum intensifying with each step. At the top, they found a large, circular room with windows that overlooked the entire city. In the center stood the pendulum, suspended from the ceiling, its glow casting long, eerie shadows across the room. It swayed gently, as if in time with a rhythm only it could hear. Mr. Chuma stood next to it, his eyes fixed on the pendulum's movement. He didn't look up as they entered, but Biko could feel the tension in the air, like a rubber band stretched to its breaking point. You shouldn't have come here, Mr. Chuma said, his voice low and distant. The pendulum has already chosen its path. There's no stopping it now. Amani stepped forward, her eyes blazing with defiance. We are not afraid of you or your pendulum. Whatever it's showing you, it's just a trick. A lie. Mr. Chuma turned, his gaze cold and calculating. A lie? No, Amani. This is the truth. The pendulum reveals the darkest parts of us, the things we hide even from ourselves. It's not a tool or a weapon, it's a mirror. As Mr. Chuma spoke, the pendulum's glow intensified, filling the room with a blinding light. Biko shielded his eyes, feeling a strange pull, as if the pendulum was reaching inside him, dragging out his deepest fears. He saw flashes of his past, moments he had buried, failures, regrets, and the haunting sense that he was always one step away from losing everything. Amani stumbled, clutching her head as if trying to block out the visions. Biko reached out, grabbing her hand. We can do this, he whispered, trying to steady his own breath. We just have to stay together. The pendulum swung faster, the light flickering like a strobe. Biko felt the ground shift beneath him, the room warping and twisting as if reality itself was unraveling. For a moment, he was back in the marketplace, surrounded by faceless figures that whispered his name. Then he was on the streets of Tanga, alone and lost, the city a labyrinth of shifting shadows. But then he saw Amani beside him, her presence a steady anchor in the storm. Biko squeezed her hand, focusing on the feel of her warmth, her strength. They were in this together, and that was enough to push back the darkness. As the pendulum swung wildly, Mr. Chuma's expression shifted from confidence to confusion. He glanced at the pendulum, then back at Biko and Amani. This can't be right, he muttered, the first hint of doubt creeping into his voice. Biko took a step forward, his own fear melting into determination. You think you can control it, but you're wrong. The pendulum doesn't serve you, it serves itself. With a sudden burst of energy, Biko reached for the pendulum, his hand brushing against the glowing surface. There was a blinding flash, and the room exploded with light. Biko felt himself falling, the world spinning around him, but he held on to Amani's hand, refusing to let go. When the light faded, they were back in the clock tower, the pendulum hanging still and silent. Mr. Chuma was on the ground, dazed and disoriented, the confidence drained from his face. The pendulum's glow had dimmed, its power seemingly neutralized. Biko and Amani exchanged a look, a silent acknowledgement of their victory. They had faced the pendulum's darkness and emerged stronger. But as they stared at the now dormant pendulum, they knew their journey was far from over. The pendulum's secrets were still buried deep, and the cult was not done with them yet. The victory at the clock tower felt short-lived. As Biko and Amani stepped back into the city streets, it became clear that the pendulum's influence had spread far beyond what they had imagined. Posters bearing cryptic symbols began appearing around the city, and whispers of a new power circulated through the alleys and markets. The cult's presence was everywhere, and the pendulum's reach was growing. Biko glanced at one of the posters, a shiver running down his spine. It depicted a symbol that was eerily similar to the one etched on the pendulum, a swirling spiral that seemed to pull the viewer's gaze inward. "They are recruiting," Biko muttered. "The cult's trying to expand, using the pendulum to draw more people in." Amani tore the poster down, crumpling it in her fist. "We can't let them. If they get more people under their control, there's no telling what they'll do." Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden commotion from a nearby alley. A group of people had gathered, staring at a large screen that had been set up against the wall. The screen flickered, showing distorted images of Tanga, overlaid with the cult symbols. A voice echoed from the speakers, smooth and persuasive, weaving promises of power and fulfillment. Biko pushed through the crowd, recognizing the voice immediately. It was Mr. Chuma. He was broadcasting his message to the entire city, using the pendulum's allure to draw in the masses. "This is just the beginning," Mr. Chuma's voice boomed. "The pendulum's truth is for all who are willing to see it. Join us, and unlock the power within." Amani's grip tightened on Biko's arm. "He's using the pendulum's pull to brainwash them. We have to stop this broadcast." Biko nodded, scanning the area for the source of the transmission. His eyes landed on a nearby rooftop where a small satellite dish was positioned, pointed directly at the screen. Without hesitation, he sprinted towards the building, Amani close behind. Climbing the fire escape, they reached the roof just as the broadcast started to escalate. The dish hummed with energy, and Biko could feel the pendulum's pull intensifying, tugging at his mind with invisible fingers. He stumbled, but Amani caught him, her grip grounding him in reality. "We have to disable it," Amani urged, pointing to the satellite dish. "It's amplifying the pendulum's signal." Biko grabbed a loose pipe from the ground, swinging it with all his might. The dish shattered, sparks flying as the transmission cut off abruptly. Below, the crowd murmured in confusion, the hypnotic spell broken. Biko and Amani watched as people slowly dispersed, their expressions dazed but returning to normal. As they caught their breath, Amani looked over at Biko, her eyes fierce. "This isn't over. Mr. Chuma's going to come back stronger. We need to find a way to destroy the pendulum once and for all." Biko nodded, a sense of determination settling over him. They had made progress, but the pendulum's shadow still loomed large over Tanga. They would need more than just courage to bring it down, they would need a plan, and perhaps allies they hadn't yet considered. But for now, they had won another battle, and that was enough to keep them moving forward. Together, they descended from the rooftop, ready to face whatever dark surprises the pendulum had in store next. As dawn broke over Tanga, Biko and Amani found themselves in a small cafe, plotting their next move. The city was recovering from the chaos of the previous night, but the pendulum's influence remained palpable. The cafe was a rare sanctuary of normalcy, filled with the comforting aroma of coffee and the quiet hum of conversation. They had decided to use this brief respite to gather their thoughts and regroup. Amani scanned the notes and sketches they had gathered over the past few weeks, trying to piece together the puzzle. "The pendulum's energy isn't just affecting people," she said thoughtfully. "It's creating rifts, distortions in reality. Every time it's used, it opens a gateway to something darker." Biko sipped his coffee, his mind racing. "So the pendulum isn't just a tool, it's a bridge. It connects our world with something else. That's why the cult wants it, they're trying to bring whatever's on the other side into our reality." Amani nodded, her eyes focused on a particularly intricate drawing. Exactly. And if we don't close these rifts, the pendulum will continue to pull in more dark energy, making it stronger. We need to find a way to seal them. As they talked, the cafe's door swung open, and a man stepped in, his face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He scanned the room, his gaze settling on Biko and Amani. Without a word, he approached their table, his presence radiating an air of authority. "I've been looking for you," the man said in a low, gravelly voice. "You're the ones who've been interfering with the pendulum." Biko and Amani exchanged wary glances. "And who might you be?" Biko asked, his tone guarded. The man removed his hat, revealing a face etched with lines of age and wisdom. "My name is Juma. I was once a member of the cult, but I left when I realized what they were truly after. I've been trying to stop them from the inside, but it's been difficult." Amani leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. "Why should we trust you?" Juma sighed, the troubled expression on his face. "Because the pendulum is far more dangerous than you realize. It's not just a source of power, it's a doorway to an ancient force that predates humanity. If the cult succeeds, they'll unleash something that can't be controlled." Biko's heart raced. "What do you know about this ancient force?" Juma hesitated, glancing around the cafe to ensure they weren't overheard. "It's known as the Void. It's a realm of chaos and destruction, a place where the laws of reality don't apply. The pendulum was created to tap into its energy, but it's unstable. Every time it's used, it tears at the fabric of our world, weakening the barrier between us and the Void." Amani's eyes widened. "So the rifts, they're not just random distortions, they're breaches to this Void." Juma nodded solemnly. "Exactly. And if the cult manages to open a permanent gateway, they'll be able to control the Void's energy, harnessing its power for themselves. But the Void doesn't play by anyone's rules. It's a force of pure entropy. Even the cult won't be able to control it." Biko clenched his fists. "What can we do to stop this?" Juma looked around the cafe, his voice dropping to a whisper. "There's an artifact, an ancient seal that can close the rifts. It's hidden in a temple deep in the jungle, a place the cult doesn't know about. But it won't be easy to retrieve. The path is filled with traps and illusions designed to protect the seal." Amani nodded, determination in her eyes. "We'll go. We'll find the seal and use it to close the rifts." Juma handed them a small map, its edges frayed and worn. "Be careful. The cult will be looking for you. And remember, whatever you do, don't let the pendulum touch you. It can manipulate your fears, your desires, turning you into something you're not." With a final nod, Juma left the cafe, disappearing into the early morning haze. Biko and Amani stared at the map, their resolve stealing. They had a new mission, one that would take them into the heart of danger. But they were ready. The fate of Tanga, and perhaps the world, rested on their shoulders. The journey to the temple was arduous. Biko and Amani traveled through dense jungle, their path obscured by thick foliage and tangled vines. The air was thick with humidity, and the sounds of the jungle, chirping insects, distant animal calls, filled their ears. The map had led them to an ancient trail, barely visible through the underbrush. "Stay close," Amani instructed, her eyes scanning the surroundings. "We don't know what kind of traps or illusions Juma mentioned." Biko nodded, his senses alert. The jungle was alive with hidden dangers, and every shadow seemed to harbor secrets. The deeper they ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, as if the very air was charged with unseen energy. As they navigated the treacherous terrain, Biko noticed a peculiar pattern on the ground, a series of symbols etched into the dirt, glowing faintly in the dim light. "Look at this," he said, pointing to the markings. "This must be part of the protection for the seal." Amani crouched beside the symbols, studying them closely. These symbols are ancient. They are meant to ward off intruders. We need to be careful not to trigger any traps. Just as she spoke, the ground beneath them shifted, and a hidden pit opened up, revealing a deep chasm lined with sharp, jagged rocks. Biko and Amani leaped back just in time, narrowly avoiding the deadly fall. "That was close," Biko said, his heart pounding. "We need to find a safer way across." They continued cautiously, navigating a series of traps, hidden spikes, false paths, then shifting walls, until they reached the entrance of the temple. It was an imposing structure, half hidden by overgrowth and time. Ancient carvings adorned its walls, depicting scenes of battles and rituals long forgotten. As they entered the temple, they were greeted by an eerie silence. The interior was dimly lit by shafts of light that filtered through cracks in the ceiling. Dust motes danced in the air, and the walls were lined with intricate carvings that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. Amani led the way, her flashlight illuminating the path. They followed the map's instructions, navigating through a labyrinth of corridors and chambers. Each step brought them closer to the heart of the temple, where the seal was said to be hidden. Finally, they arrived at a grand chamber, its walls adorned with glowing symbols. At the center of the room stood an altar, and atop it rested the seal, an ornate, jewel-encrusted artifact that pulsed with a faint, ethereal light. Biko and Amani approached the altar, their steps measured and cautious. But as they drew closer, the room seemed to come alive with movement. Shadows twisted and danced along the walls, and a low, guttural growl echoed through the chamber. "The pendulum," Amani whispered. "It's trying to reach us." Suddenly, the chamber was filled with a blinding light, and the shadows coalesced into a monstrous form, an apparition of swirling darkness, its eyes glowing with malevolent intent. The creature roared, its presence suffusing the room with a sense of impending doom. Biko and Amani braced themselves, knowing they had to fight not just for the seal, but for their very souls. They could feel the pendulum's influence, the dark energy trying to pry open their deepest fears and weaknesses. But they stood firm, their resolve unshaken. Amani grabbed the seal, her hands trembling but determined. "We have to get out of here, now." Biko nodded, and they made a hasty retreat, the apparition's roar echoing behind them. As they navigated the temple's maze once more, the energy from the seal seemed to repel the dark force, providing a shield against the pendulum's reach. Finally, they emerged from the jungle, breathless but victorious. The seal was in their possession, and with it, the power to close the rifts and push back against the pendulum's darkness. But they knew their journey was far from over. The cult would not give up easily, and the final confrontation was yet to come. Back in Tanga, Biko and Amani found themselves at a crossroads. The jungle had tested their limits, and although they had secured the seal, the weight of their mission pressed heavily upon them. The city's skyline loomed in the distance, a stark reminder of the looming threat they faced. They headed to their temporary safe house, the modest, unassuming apartment in the heart of the city. As they settled in, Amani began to research ways to use the seal to close the rifts. Biko, however, was consumed by a gnawing feeling of unease. "We need to be ready for anything," Biko said, his voice tinged with worry. "The cult won't just sit back and let us stop them. They'll come after us with everything they've got." Amani glanced up from her notes. "I know. But right now, we need to focus on figuring out how to use the seal. If we don't, all this will be for nothing." Just as Amani began to delve into her research, a chilling sound echoed through the apartment, a series of rhythmic knocks on the door. Biko's heart skipped a beat. He moved cautiously toward the door, glancing back at Amani, who looked equally unsettled. As Biko opened the door, a familiar figure stood in the hallway, Juma. His face was ashen, his eyes wide with terror. "They found us," Juma said, his voice trembling. "The cult knows where you are. They are coming for the seal." Before Biko or Amani could respond, a violent explosion shook the building. The walls trembled, and debris rained down as a powerful shockwave ripped through the apartment. They stumbled, struggling to regain their footing as dust and smoke filled the air. "Get down!" Biko shouted, pulling Amani to the floor. They could hear the sounds of chaos, shouting, fights, and the unmistakable roar of the pendulum's dark energy. Through the haze, Biko and Amani saw shadowy figures storming into their apartment, their faces obscured by masks. The cult members moved with terrifying efficiency, their intent clear: they were here to take the seal. Amani grabbed the seal from its hiding place and clutched it tightly. "We need to get out of here, now." Biko nodded, and they raced through the back of the apartment, dodging debris and cult members. They managed to escape onto the fire escape, the city streets below a chaotic blur. They could hear the cult members shouting orders, their pursuit relentless. As they descended, Biko's mind raced. "We need to find a safe place to regroup and figure out our next move. We can't keep running forever." Amani agreed, and they made their way through the labyrinthine streets of Tanga, eventually reaching a hidden underground bunker, a relic from the city's past. The bunker was an old storage facility, its entrance concealed by overgrown vegetation. Inside, they took a moment to catch their breath. The air was damp and musty, the walls lined with old crates and rusty equipment. Amani set up a small, makeshift lab to analyze the seal and determine how it could be used to close the rifts. Biko paced nervously, his thoughts racing. "We need to anticipate the cult's next move. They are going to try and overwhelm us with everything they have." As Amani walked, Biko suddenly felt a strange sensation, a prickling on the back of his neck, as if someone was watching them. He turned sharply, but the bunker remained silent and still. "What is it?" Amani asked, glancing up from her work. "I don't know," Biko said, his voice tinged with anxiety. "But I have a bad feeling. Like we are being watched." Just then, the bunker's lights flickered and dimmed. The temperature dropped suddenly, and a ghostly chill filled the air. Shadows seemed to move of their own accord, and the walls appeared to shift and distort. Amani looked around in alarm. "This isn't normal. Something's wrong." The air grew heavier, and a deep, resonant voice echoed through the bunker. "You cannot escape the darkness. It is all-encompassing, and it will consume you." Biko and Amani looked at each other, their faces pale with fear. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a haunting presence that sent shivers down their spines. Suddenly, the walls of the bunker began to warp and ripple, revealing glimpses of a nightmarish landscape beyond, an endless expanse of swirling darkness and chaotic energy. The void was reaching into their reality, its influence manifesting in their sanctuary. "Get the seal!" Biko shouted, trying to keep his composure. "We need to use it now." Amani hurriedly examined the seal, trying to activate its power. The symbols on the artifact began to glow with an intense light, pushing back against the encroaching darkness. But the force from the void was relentless, and the bunker continued to distort, threatening to tear them apart. With a final, desperate effort, Amani activated the seal. A brilliant, blinding light erupted from the artifact, forcing the shadows and the void's influence back. The walls of the bunker shuddered, and the nightmarish landscape vanished, leaving them in eerie silence. Breathing heavily, Biko and Amani collapsed to the floor, their bodies drenched in sweat. They had survived the encounter, but the danger was far from over. "We need to be more careful," Biko said, his voice shaking. "The cult isn't the only threat. The void is trying to break through, and it won't stop until it's unleashed." Amani nodded, her face determined. "We need to find a way to strengthen the seal and close the rifts permanently. And we need to be ready for whatever the cult throws at us next." As they prepared for the challenges ahead, Biko and Amani knew that the stakes were higher than ever, and the darkness they faced was unlike anything they had ever imagined. The cult's relentless pursuit have left Biko and Amani on edge. Will they make it? Join us on the final episode to find out.